Hi, my name is Joseph Shigoya, student ID number 5004. For my case study number 7, I'm going to do a trauma case. So uh, on the 19th of November in 2019, I was at Metro Station, and at 13:45 hours, we were dispatched to an assault case. When we got on scene, we seen a 25-year-old woman, um, I guess average build, probably about 60 kilograms or something like that. The patient had a lot of blood on her. A lot of it was dried blood, like all over her body. She was anal times 4. She was crying, so obvious distress. Um, the dried blood was on her arms. It was on her face. She had a little bit of running blood down her face, but the dried blood was on her arms, some part of her face, shoulders, um, on her exposed stomach area, and then like her legs. HPD and HFD were both on the scene. As soon as we pulled up, there was a bunch of bystanders as well. So we pull up with the gurney, we have the equipment, and the first thing that the medic does is he goes and we start checking her for C-collar, for spinal restriction. So we put the collar on her. They do a quick assessment. In the meantime, I'm kind of just taking vitals, because I seen how bloody she was. I was kind of like in the zone, and not really paying attention to much of the history at that point. When I was taking the blood pressure, I noticed that like out of the corner of my eye, I seen HPD, and HPD was grabbing a male. The male was next to the car, but the car was next to some bushes and some trees. And 2 HPD officers were grabbing this guy out of the bushes, and I was like, wait, what's going on? Because at this point, all I did was hop out of the vehicle, and I did not know where we were, because a lot of the times when I was on clinicals, I would just hop out of the vehicle and not know what the situation was, because they wouldn't tell me in the back, because the information would be on the screen in the front. So a lot of times I just wouldn't know what we showed up to. So I didn't know what we showed up to. I thought that this patient had fallen from a hike. And so we put her in the ambulance, and from there we attached the monitor to her, get all the vitals again, and then I start understanding the history of what happened. So this patient was a 25-year-old woman from Nevada. She was on vacation in Hawaii, and she was here by herself. She had met a guy 3 days ago, and she was hanging out with him. The guy was from here, and she was hanging out with him for the last 3 days of her vacation. She had a flight that day that we picked her up in the ambulance, and so she didn't really know who this guy was. She just knew his first name, didn't know his last name, and she was like, okay, well, I need to go to the airport, so I'm gonna go ahead and drop you off. But she didn't know where to drop him off, so she was like, she told me that she dropped him off in the place that she felt was best for him, that where he could be safe. So she dropped him off at what I understand was a detox center. So when she arrived there, she was getting ready to drop him off. He just started assaulting her. He stabbed her multiple times with a pen, so she had lacerations on her face, right here on her neck. They weren't really bad lacerations. It was just like, from a pen. So I mean, it was maybe 1 inch long, with like maybe a couple millimeters deep at most. So lacerations weren't too bad, but he also started beating her, so she had bruises and stuff like that. And because this happened, she missed her flight, so she didn't get to go home that day. Instead, she got a trip to Queens Punch Bowl. So we took her to Queens Punch Bowl. We arrived on scene, and the full trauma code was activated when we were there. So they had the full team ready. Another thing to note was, while we were en route to the hospital, we had asked the patient, had she used any drugs or alcohol, and the medic asked that, right? So then the patient kind of like hesitated, and then she said no. So then I kind of felt like she was scared to tell us. A little while later, I had asked her, so did you have any alcohol or anything to smoke or anything like that, or any drugs really. And she said no. And then I explained to her, because she again hesitated to answer. So I explained to her, we're not the police. We don't, like, it doesn't matter to us if you do or don't. We just need to know, that way we can go ahead and give the hospital a heads up, and that way, because we kind of need to know those things for medical treatment, right? So then she confessed to me and she said, okay, I drank. And then I asked her how much. She said she had about 2 drinks of vodka. And then she told me that it was about 2 hours before this whole situation happened. And then she also confessed to me that she smoked marijuana. So she drank and smoked, and then was driving around to go drop off the one guy. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of dangerous, but at least she was honest with me. And so then when the medic was going ahead and giving the verbal report to the nurse, he said no history of no drinking or drugs involved. And then I told him, oh wait, no, on the ambulance she told me that she did. So I was able to I kind of felt like useful at that point, because the medic didn't get the information, but I had it, so I just told the medic that. So in terms of denials for this patient, the patient denied loss of consciousness. She didn't have any auditory or visual changes. She didn't have any nausea, vomiting. She did confess to me that she pooped in her pants during the assault. I didn't really smell anything in the ambulance, but she was really embarrassed about that, and I told her, like, it's fine. Like, when you get to the hospital, they'll clean anything up, and then they're going to go ahead and change you into their gown. So it kind of helped relieve some stress that she was feeling and embarrassment about that. The patient, so her heart rate was pretty high. So it was 149, or 150, sorry. The blood pressure was 130/70. Her blood glucose was 133. Her temperature was 100.1, and then her SpO2 reading was sitting at 98%. The patient had cuts under her nose and under her right eye. Her pupils were pearl at 3 millimeters. Patient with clear lung sounds bilaterally, no neurological deficits. She didn't have any crepitus or any kind of damage to her head, no swelling. The patient did have neck pain, which is kind of why we activated the spinal restriction. The body for the patient and like her legs and all that, they didn't have any cuts. They just kind of had dried blood on them. En route to the hospital in terms of treatment, we placed her in the seat collar. We gave her an IV running with normal saline. We gave her the full liter bag of the normal saline. And from what I understand, even though she didn't necessarily need the full bag of normal saline, it's for preparation purposes, because most likely the hospital is going to give her some kind of drugs, and they can run it through the saline that we already have attached. So we gave her the bag. We cleared the blood that was running from her nose and under her eye. We didn't bandage it, but we kind of stopped like the running blood coming down, and then we placed her in semi-Fowler position, and then had rapid transport lights and sirens. The patient's heart rate, so it fluctuated from 135 to 160, so nothing super crazy, but she still kind of had a pretty fast heart rate. While we were taking the blood pressure, we had the blood pressure going, and then we had the IV in her arm. So she was complaining to me that the blood pressure was hurting her arm, and that she was losing feeling in it and stuff like that. And I told her, well, I'm sorry, but we need to take a blood pressure. It's just a blood pressure, like it's nothing serious or anything like that. And she was getting really scared because her arm was hurting. And so at that point, I kind of realized that, even though this patient is hurt and all that, she still was under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So her perception was slightly altered. So it kind of leads me to think that maybe that is why she experienced so much pain in her arm when we were just taking the blood pressure. We already had the IV in, so I think a lot of it was just kind of mental. But I mean, obviously I can't say that. It's just kind of off the top of my head thinking in terms of that. So in terms of the pathophysiology for this, so when you have a cut, so the patient had small lacerations. A laceration is is a cut within the skin. It kind of separates the skin, it's a cut that goes vertically down. So when you have kinetic energy moving, it's going to transfer that kinetic energy onto something else. So the kinetic energy of the male using the knife, or not the knife, the pen to stab the patient. That kinetic energy that he used was transferred, made a laceration, and caused bleeding and all that. In terms of bleeding, for pathophysiology on that, so there's three types of different vessels in the body. So you have arteries, veins, and then capillaries. So capillaries are the smallest part of the circulatory system. They are kind of the mediator between the arteries and the veins. And a lot of cuts, when you cut yourself on the finger, a lot of it is capillaries. They usually stop pretty quickly. In general, they're typically the least serious in terms of like between capillaries, arteries, and veins. Capillaries are the least serious. Veins can be pretty serious if you cut open a vein. However, because it's not an artery, arteries have pressurized blood going through it, so it just forces blood. So that's when you see the spurting coming out of arteries. Veins kind of just ooze out because they're just filling. When blood goes from the arteries to the veins, it stops being pressurized, and instead it just kind of fills up. So that's why the blood doesn't spurt out; it just kind of oozes out because it's just kind of filling up through the body and then moving back towards the heart, as opposed to it being pressurized. Okay, sorry. So I had to switch locations because the people around me were being pretty loud, so I switched locations. So going back to what I was talking about, in terms of blood clotting, so like the process of healing an injured blood vessel, you have three steps really. You have vasoconstriction of the blood vessel, you have platelet plug formation, and then you have coagulation. So when you have an injured blood vessel, the vessels are going to end up constricting. That's going to reduce the amount of blood flowing through that vessel, and then it's going to be the first part of the healing process for that. The second part of it is going to be the platelet plug formation. So you have platelets, and they're going to start binding to one another. They're going to adhere to one, and then after that they're going to release cytokines. The cytokines are going to kind of promote a positive feedback loop, because the cytokines are going to cause vasoconstriction, and then they're going to cause activation of more platelets, and then the activation of those other platelets are going to cause cytokines to be released. The cytokines are going to cause vasoconstriction, more platelet activation, and then etc. etc. So that's a positive feedback loop. Once the blood vessel is once the platelet plug is formed, then the vessel can heal. After that, the collagen that's from the exposed injury site is going to mix with factors within the blood. Both the mixing of those are going to form fibrin. Fibrin is going to stabilize the platelet plug that's being formed, and then after the injury site is healed, the fibrin is going to be dissolved by plasmin, and then once the fibrin is dissolved, the platelet plug is going to leave the injury site, and then that is the end of the injury cycle. So this patient was smoking marijuana. So marijuana is a cannabinoid. So you have naturally in our brain cells, we have cannabinoid receptors. So the cannabinoid receptors, they're neurotransmitters that have functioning in things like memory, thinking, concentration, and other things like that. So when you smoke marijuana, the THC in marijuana acts as a cannabinoid, and it adheres to the same receptors that the brain naturally has. So it produces effects that are altered, and so that's where you get the altered mental status, altered sensations, and all that. So